Okay, in this lesson, we're going to take what we did in lesson 6 and expand it and make it a little bit more musical, using it in real terms with an example solo. So what we're going to be looking at is using those arpeggio shapes to create licks. And we're going to look at following the chords with the arpeggios. So for example, when it's on A7, we're going to look at playing around with the A7 shape in 2 different positions. We're going to look at using the D7 arpeggios over the D7 chord, E7 arpeggio over the E7 chord. So it's essentially like we're changing key. Now a lot of those notes will cross over to the original A Mixolydian blues scale that we learned a couple of lessons back. But by following the chords, you'll find it, with the arpeggio shapes, you'll find it much easier to accent the chord tones, which was another thing we spoke about last lesson, about landing on, it's good to land on root notes, but you can also land on other notes of the chord. And when you follow with the arpeggio shapes, that actually makes it a lot easier because you've got the chord tones underneath your fingers. So I'll play through the solo up to speed, and then we'll break it down after that. Okay, so for the first A7 chord, we're going to start off on an A note on the 7th fret D string. Then going to play 5 to 6 hammering on the G. We then come up to the B string, we play 5. We then come to the 7th fret on the B. We're going to bend it up and bring it back down. And then we play 5th on the B. So I'll play that all the way through, and this is just around that A7 arpeggio there. Then as it changes to the D7, we're going to land on the 3rd of that chord, here, the 7th fret on the B string. We then run up the D7 arpeggio from here, the 7th on the G, 7th on the B, 5th on the E. We then play 8 on the E, so a full D7 arpeggio there. I then finish off on the D note here. Now as it changes back to the A7 chord, I do a double bend here, up to an E note. Now E is the 5th of A, so it's a note other than the root note that we can land on. It's within the chord of A7, therefore it's absolutely fine to land on it. So I'll play it through slowly up to where we are so far. Then we're on A7 for 2 bars, so we've got a little rest before we do this bend and release on the 10th fret. We then come to the 8th fret, and we're just going to give it a semitone bend, or a quarter tone semitone, doesn't really matter too much, like a little slur, as you come back to the root note of A on the 10th fret there. So that first bar on the A7. Now the next chord is going to be D7 at the end of this bar, so we need a little way to get into that. And we're going to end up in this shape of the D7, up around here, 12th fret D note here. That's our aim. So to get from there, from here, we can do a little triplet lead in, which goes like this: 12 on the beat, 10 on the beat, 12 on the G, and then we land on 11 on the G. Now that is the 3rd of D7, which is perfectly fine to land on because it's within the notes of D7. I'll play the last bar through slowly. From there, we're going to come up to this D note on the high E string here, 10th fret. We're then going to do an arpeggio run, so we go from 12 on the D string, 11 on the G, 10 on the B, 12 on the B there. Once we get there, we're going to bend it up a semitone, bring it back down, 10 on the B, we then pull off 12 to 11 on the G. Now we're going to change back to A7, so we're going to look to land on a note of the A7 chord. We're going to come to 12 on the D, and we pull off to the 11th fret. Now that is the 3rd of A. We'll play that all the way through from the D chord change. Now we're on to A7 for 2 bars, and we're going to do an A7 arpeggio run up. We start off on the 14th fret on the G string, and we play 14, 14 on the B, 12 on the E, we play 14 on the E, we then play 15 on the E, and then we do this little grace note slide where we go 13 to 14. The 13th's not properly played, it's just glanced over. From there we play 12 on the E, 15 on the B, 14, and back to 15. We then play 12 on the E, 13th on the B, we do a semitone bend, 14th on the G. Now the next change will be going to the turnaround, so it'll be going up to E7, D7, A7 and back to E7. So to get to E7, what we're going to look to do is we're here on the 14th fret on the G, we're going to pull that off to the 12th, then as it changes to the E7, we're going to hammer onto the 13th on the G string because that is the 3rd note of the E7 chord. Now we've got an E7 arpeggio around here. So we're going to play around with some stuff around there. Play the E7 lick through slowly. Now we've landed on D note as it changes to the D7 chord. We're going to then come up and play an octave higher, 15th fret on the B string. We then play 13 on the B, 12, 10. From there we play 12 on the G, then we play these quick slide notes, just little grace notes. We go 10 to 11 on the G, we play 12 on the D, and then as it changes to A7 we're going to look to land on the 3rd again, which is here, 11th fret D string, but what we're going to do is another grace note sliding into it. So that last little bit, I'll play the whole of the D7 lick. After we've landed on that 3rd of A7, we're going to play the root note of A on the 14th fret G string. So we go. Then it changes back to E7 as the final chord of the 12-bar sequence, and we're going to finish off with a chromatic lick that's built around the E7 arpeggio shape. Now this is one of my favourite things to do. I probably do it too often, but we take the dominant 7 arpeggio shape and we just fill in the gaps with chromatic notes. Now if you were to land on one, it might not sound so good, but because we're like playing over it fairly fast, it sounds cool, gives it an almost kind of jazzy vibe. Also, because of the chords on the turnaround, it isn't a strict E7, it's actually an E7 sharp 9. You might know it as the Hendrix chord. Now this is what's known as an altered chord. It has a flattened third and a major third in there because it's called E7 sharp 9. The sharp 9 is the same as a flat 3. You can get away with playing that kind of thing over this chord because it's got quite an ambiguous sound and the notes just work. So this lick from here, 14th fret on the D string, we play 14, 13 on the G, 12 on the B, 15 on the B. So that's just the E7 arpeggio. We're then going to fill in the gaps with some chromatic notes. So we go 14, 13, 12 on the B, and then we do the same thing on the G. We go 14, 13, 12. We then play 14 on the D, 12 on the D, and then we slide down to the third of A, because the chord progression goes back round to A, starts all over again, and we play the 11th fret on the D, which is the third of A. So that whole E7 lick all the way through. I'll play it all the way through to the backing track up to speed. Okay, as with all the exercises, play around with this, try and make it your own. You haven't just got to learn the licks exactly as they're written, but do try and take the principles and learn from them and play around with them. So using the arpeggio shapes, moving them around with the chords. So when it goes to D7, try playing around with the D7 shape, putting in some extra notes, some chromatic notes like we did on that last E7 chord on the turnaround. Try some things like that and see what you can come up with. Try landing on different notes of the arpeggio. Some will sound nice, some might sound a little bit weird, some might sound good here but not good here. Try it out and experiment and see what you like the sound of. Have fun with it and make it your own.